This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping heading to Italy, Monaco, and France. We update you on the rescue and relief efforts after the devastating cyclone in southern Africa. And pullout of government troops from army bases heightens security concerns in Somalia. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta live in Nairobi. For those of you joining us across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Rama Nyang, who has our business headlines. Rama.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business tonight. Zimbabwe to increase the salaries of its lowest paid civil servants by nearly 30%. And South Africa's Group 5 has filed for business rescue. We'll look at its rise and fall in a course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Richard.
All right, let's now get you an update on the devastation caused by a cyclone in southern Africa. Aid agencies from around the world have been coordinating relief efforts in the Beira area north of Mozambique. Angela Coppola is there and filed this report. Let's take a look.
The main focus now is to get to those stranded communities outside the Beira city limits, but it's a challenge.
It's hectic out there. The vast water, it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometers. To reach communities is 30 kilometers of water. So to reach those vulnerable communities, the challenge is you can't take boats. You can't just take a barge in here and stuff. They're going to get stuck. The challenge is air support.
The weather pattern is still unsettled and there's more bad news on the way for isolated communities in the Beira area.
The sluice gates up between the Zimbabwe and Mozambican border has been open. Water is going to be rising. If you look at the climate, more rain is coming. So much more challenges in the end of the day.
Teams are working to full capacity, but they are hamstrung.
I estimate 5,000 to 10,000 people need immediate evacuation. There isn't much helicopters. And I mean, helicopters, you need those helicopters that can get it large capacity. We've got enough search and rescue personnel that can go out and medical doctors to provide treatment in the interim.
While the sun is shining at the moment, the water levels haven't dropped yet, and we do understand that there's more water coming in from Zimbabwe. That's not good news for those people that are still stranded. I'm Angela Coppola for CGTN in Beira, Mozambique.
Well, the World Food Program has warned that Mozambique is facing a major humanitarian emergency that is getting bigger by the day. Earlier, we spoke to Gerald Burke. He is the Regional Communications Officer in Southern Africa for the World Food Program. Let's take a look.
Well, we've got a huge disaster unfolding here. In fact, we have a number of overlapping disasters. The first were the heavy rain and winds that occurred for days before Cyclone Idai struck last Thursday. Over 100,000 people were affected across 3 countries, including Mozambique. Then we had the cyclone itself, a Category 3 cyclone, which devastated Beira. Hardly a building in the city of 500,000 is untouched. Telecommunications and power is out. The shops are closed. There are many, many displaced people, some of them sheltering in schools and churches. WFP is distributing easy-to-prepare food in those centres and elsewhere in the area beyond Beira. It has been very difficult because telecommunications are down, because roads are blocked, because large areas are flooded, to access areas to make assessments and to deliver food. Much of the assistance beyond Beira is having to be delivered by aircraft, by helicopters. Those of WFP, the South African Army, and others. So access is a huge problem. Another factor is that because it has been raining so heavily, a assessments have been particularly difficult. The scale of the crisis is another challenge. Our warehouse in Beira was very, very badly damaged by the cyclone. Some of the food in the warehouse is intact. We are distributing that, but we are mobilizing large quantities of food elsewhere in southern Africa to bring in by plane and by ship. Cereals, fortified foods, vegetable oil, those kinds of things. This is a major crisis. It's getting bigger. It will be some time before we appreciate the full dimensions of the crisis. It's a crisis that will run for some time. It's going to take several months, if not longer, for example, for the city of Beira to recover. So the needs will be very considerable. It's vitally important that the international community steps up and supports those who are in need and very, very deserving.
In Zimbabwe, President Emerson Mnangagwa says his government has secured enough food aid to cater for all the people affected by the cyclone Nta. He said this while on a tour of the flood-hit Eastern Highlands region. Farai Wakatuya has more.
President Emerson Mnangagwa came to get a first-hand appreciation of the rescue mission that had been delayed by bad weather and inaccessibility to the affected areas. The cyclone-ravaged Eastern Highlands have been declared a national disaster, and Mnangagwa has since directed that the strategic grain reserve be set aside for the affected communities. He's received pledges of support from several African countries, enough to ensure that none here will go hungry. Convoys of food aid have started arriving in Chimanimani. More, donated by ordinary citizens, are on the way as Zimbabweans rally together to respond to one of the worst natural disasters the country has ever seen. Volunteers have been working round the clock to pack food, water and clothing dropped off at numerous collection points across the country.
To be honest, it's what Zimbabweans do. You know, as soon as any of our people in a crisis, we band together and we come to help wherever we can. It's what Zimbabweans are made of.
There are plans to extend the assistance beyond the immediate emergency.
The victims themselves their lives have been changed in so many ways, and so this obviously a meal here and there and some medical help now is what we're providing, and we would like to help long term, but it's going to need bigger funding for getting housing developed, and that's going to be a long-term project that definitely needs to be looked into by our community. And the Zimbabwe community is phenomenal. I have been blown away by the generosity of the people of Zimbabwe, so I'm sure they can do more than just an initial crisis management.
Amidst the despondency, there is something to cheer. Zimbabweans have refused to take the battering from Cyclone Nta lying down, and they are responding in the only way they can, in kind, providing a much-needed silver lining to the dark cloud that has been hanging over this nation. Farai Wakatuya, CGTN, in the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, the Chinese community in Zimbabwe has also extended a helping hand to Zimbabwe flood victims. The Chinese community has donated food items, water, toiletries, blankets, sleeping bags, tents, and clothes valued at over $200,000. The Chinese ambassador to Zimbabwe has pledged support and assistance to help the southern African country to be better prepared during times of disaster.
As true brother, true friends, true partner of Zimbabwe, China feels how the Zimbabwean people are feeling and are always standing side by side, ready to offer maximum possible support. The Chinese community in Zimbabwe heeded the calls of the embassy and took the lead in raising funds and mobilizing resources to the best of their ability to support the Zimbabwean people. We hope all this support will help Zimbabwean people to gain strength and confidence to overcome the difficulty.
This donation of various assortment of food items and blankets by the Chinese embassy in conjunction with the Chinese business community will go a long way in alleviating the plight of the victims of the cyclone. I'm pleased to note that as confirmation of the excellent relations between the People's Republic of China and Zimbabwe, the Chinese business community, in conjunction with the Chinese embassy, mobilized various food items. The Chinese community here in Zimbabwe have demonstrated that they have a friend at a time of our need, and as such, friends indeed to Zimbabwe.
In neighboring Malawi, the government of the People's Republic of China has donated hundreds of metric tons in food items in response to the flooding affecting the country. 2,000 metric tons of rice have already arrived in the affected southern region, and 4,000 tons more are expected to arrive in the next few days. Our reporter, Daniel Arap Moy, gives us more from southern Malawi.
The government of the People's Republic of China has provided hundreds of metric tons of rice in response to the devastating flood waters in Malawi. The donation, comprised of relief support as well as cash, is meant to help Malawians affected by the floods south of the country.
We have rice, which was donated from the government of the Republic of China, China rice, and there's also maize from the government of Malawi, plus non-food items like the plastic pails, buckets, blankets, and the reddish soya pieces.
Apart from China, Malawi has also received donations from the Norwegian Church Aid in form of tents to help ease the burden of shelter for the displaced people.
I mean, what I have seen today is quite disturbing. People have lost their food security for the months to come. The farming fields have been washed away. When it comes to access to clean drinking water, I think that's another quite disturbing part of this of these floodings.
Over 900,000 people in Malawi have been affected by severe flooding, half of whom are estimated to be children. The Malawian government has so far released $1.7 million to help the displaced. The country's road authority says $6.3 million is required to rehabilitate major roads and bridges damaged mostly in the southern region by floods. According to government figures, 14 districts, including an estimated 460,000 children, have been affected, with 56 deaths and 577 injuries recorded. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Blantyre, Malawi.
The World Food Program says thousands of people in Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique will need food assistance in the coming 3 months. The World Food Program is seeking more than $5 million to provide food and logistical support in response to the flooding in the affected areas.
Now that we have a bit more information on the situation, it looks clear that the number of 600,000 will definitely go up in the coming days. That has, of course, implication on cost. If we help 600,000 people for 3 months, that's a cost of $42 million. If we need to help up to 1.7 million people for 3 months, that will be a cost of $121.5 million. Obviously, we don't have that money today.
You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We have lots more news coming your way after the break, including pullout of government troops from army bases heightens security concerns in Somalia. And we look at what is being done to address the challenges of water scarcity across the continent.
Economic data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
In the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. British Prime Minister Theresa May has asked for a 3-month delay to Brexit. May is currently in Brussels for a 2-month summit with other European Union leaders. The request for a postponement comes after the British leader failed to get a deal ratified by Parliament, leaving the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union in turmoil. May says the delay would not rule out the possibility that Britain could still leave the EU without a deal. In Somalia, security concerns have been raised following the pullout of government troops from army bases after a payment dispute. In the southern part of the country, troops are complaining over lack of stipends and food rations. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo has more from Mogadishu.
In the past week, government troops have vacated at least 3 army bases near the capital, Mogadishu. These soldiers argue that they haven't received their salaries, some for as long as 4 months. Troops pulled out of Pullout this week, an agricultural district 30 kilometers north of Mogadishu, in protest of a missed payment. Al-Shabaab later seized the town, causing panic in the capital. The group later pulled out after destroying a security outpost in the area. Army chief has now warned that soldiers who abandon their outposts risk losing government benefits.
Every soldier who's been registered and those who are going to be registered in the coming days must remain in their military unit or base designated by the government. If one abandons his or her post with no valid reason, then the soldier will lose their benefits.
Mogadishu insists on the use of biometric registration to create a database for its armed forces. Registered soldiers were reportedly paid, prompting those not registered to vacate their garrisons. Somalia says it has registered close to 10,000 army personnel in its database, and the process is still ongoing.
The allowances of our soldiers used to be paid by several countries, among them USA, Turkey and UAE. Since taking office, we stopped that and pay them from taxes collected by the government. We have begun reforms to the army, and therefore we have created a biometric system that ensures all payments are made directly to bank accounts for every soldier.
Currently, defense spending takes a huge chunk out of the budget. Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire says the security sector reforms in his country has forced his administration to allocate more funds towards strengthening security. In 2017, the Somali government allocated $89 million for stipends and logistics to the National Army. That figure has since increased to $102 million last year, with $107 million allocated so far this year. Experts argue that reforming the National Army is a tough challenge, but one aimed at ensuring national security in the long run. For now, the Somali government heavily relies on security support from the African Union force known as AMISOM, but it will have to invest more in strengthening its own national army as the UN plans to wind down the decade-long African Union mission in Somalia. A government delegation has since been dispatched to resolve the matter, a move analysts say will allow authorities to focus more on the fight against Al-Shabaab. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
The UN plans to hold a conference in April to discuss how to implement Libya's political transition. The 2-day conference will discuss the possibility of holding national elections before the end of the year. Since 2011, the country has faced instability. A national election is hoped it could centralize power and make it more stable.
The days ahead will prove foundational to the years ahead for Libyans and the region writ large. I call on Libyans to come together and to avoid acts of obstruction and incitement. There has been a notable uptick in the weaponization of media platforms as tools of incitement. This is tearing at Libya's fragile but vital social fabric and could well be used to instigate violence.
We call upon the Security Council and the international community to cast aside their differences and take advantage of the current circumstances in Libya in order to support Mr. Ghassan Salame's efforts as Special Representative of the Secretary General and other stakeholders in organizing an inclusive national conference. Also, to arrive at an agreement that will end in intra-Libyan discourse and to establish peace throughout the country.
And to West Africa now, the city of Gao in Mali is regaining its reputation as an economic hub despite having been taken over by extremists 7 years ago, causing many residents to flee. The presence of peacekeepers and assistance from the UN Refugee Agency and other aid groups has encouraged returnees to rebuild their lives in the city. Here is CGTN's Sadiq Shaban with more.
According to the United Nations, 60,000 Malians took refuge in the neighboring countries in 2012. About 20,000 more were displaced within the country as a result of the violence in the northern part of Mali. Thanks to a 3-year, $23 million contribution from the European Union, the UNHCR has been supporting displaced Malians both in Mali and in the neighboring countries. Some of those that fled have since returned to Gao.
I have that peace and security and returned to Gao. That's why I decided to come back.
With the support of the UNHCR, these women use their irrigation projects to make a livelihood from their land. The initiative draws water from the Niger River.
In our group, there are some women who sought refuge abroad and others who stayed during the hard times. We all get along really well. We are very happy because this group brings us together.
Many of the returnees remember the terror that was prevalent during the time extremists were in control. But Gao is changing again. The city still faces insecurity, including incidences of bomb blasts and sporadic attacks, but the residents' will to rebuild is stronger, it seems. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN.
And to Nigeria now, where it's estimated that about 69 million people in the country lack access to clean water. And that's according to the National Bureau of Statistics. Worst affected are said to be the rural communities in northern Nigeria. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on that story. Let's take a look.
In April last year, a deadly wave of cholera hit this community in Nigeria's northeast Yobe state. By the time authorities were able to bring the situation in Gashua community under control, over 20 persons had died and more than 40 affected by the disease. At the heart of the problem is a source of water in the community. Their main source of water is from open wells like this one. And in the few places where boreholes have been sunk, sanitary conditions around the area are quite bad. It's practically the same story across rural communities in northern Nigeria. This open well at Angwanya Kubutanko community in the south of the northwest Kaduna state is the closest the people of the community have to clean water, and it's far from safe. And some residents of the community walk a great distance to get here. For some months and a year during the dry season, the well dries up and the people turn to the local stream in the community for water.
It is from the same stream that we get our water that cattle herders bring their cattle to drink. And usually when they get to the stream before us, we have to wait for the water to settle down before we fetch. Sometimes we use alum to purify the water before we use it. It's the water we drink, use for cooking and washing.
We have serious difficulty with water here. Even the stream where we get water most of the time is great distance from our home. We are pleading with the government to come erect a borehole here because our wives are really suffering.
Experts say in rural communities like this with water crisis, cholera and diarrhea remain the leading cause of death, especially among children under 5 years of age. The residents say it's a recurring problem in their community.
We have noticed that usually a week after we start using the water from the stream, our children will start stooling and vomiting. When we go to the hospital, they advise us against drinking the water, but what can we do? For instance, in the past 2 months, we have had rainfall here, but the rain washes all sorts of dirt, including human feces and cow dung, into the stream, and we still have no choice than to use the water. That's why we have serious problems with safe drinking water. We hope the government will come and construct boreholes here.
Access to clean, safe drinking water is a big problem in Nigeria, but it's a much bigger problem in the country's rural areas. The experience of this community is a sign of how much work still needs to be done if Nigeria hopes to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is water for all, by 2030. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And still on water matters, new solar-powered irrigation technology supported by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization is improving access to water for farmers in rural Uganda. Over 70% of Ugandans still rely on rainfall for their crops. CGTN's Hilary Ayasiga spent a day with farmers in central Uganda.
Agnes Kemirembe tends to have vegetables on this patch of land in central Uganda. But providing enough water for her crops has been a challenge.
I used to walk long distances to collect water. The place is hilly and it's tiresome to carry a 20-liter jerrycan of water to this farm.
But not anymore. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is helping farmers to access free water. They have set up a solar-powered irrigation system. The water is pumped from the Valley Dam to a storage facility near her garden, all using the power of the sun. Using this technology, Kemirembe can now grow her crops during off-season. She says this system helps her to earn all year round. She grows eggplants, cabbages and tomatoes for sale. Uganda's agriculture is largely dependent on rainfall, but that leaves farmers vulnerable to changing weather patterns. The UN believes this could be a solution.
Most of Uganda agriculture still rely on rain-fed. With the uncertainty of climate change, this can be problematic. So this type of solution is a demonstration that it's possible to bring water from the lake or from the ground to ensure that farmers can do the agriculture.
The technology is also helping farmers feed their animals.
Before this dam, I used to get like 15 liters of milk. And I didn't have these pastures, improved pastures. But when this water was brought here, this dam, and improved pastures, now I'm over 50 liters of milk.
According to the UN, 2.1 billion people in the world live without safe water at home. And figures from water.org indicate that 61% of Ugandans cannot access safe water. The solar-powered system can also filter the water to make it safe for domestic use. It's hoped that through initiatives like this, more people like Kemirembe will be able to access the water they need. Hilary Ayasiga, CGTN, Mubende, Central Uganda.
The Africa Climate Week has been going on in Ghana's capital, Accra. The event is organized by the UN in partnership with the government of Ghana. Advocates for climate action are calling for strengthening of partnerships and bold commitment to combat the impact of climate change. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra. Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports with more detail. Let's take a look.
This year's Africa Climate Week, themed A Race We Can Win, focuses on building strong regional foundation for climate action under the Paris Agreement signed in 2015. The agreement's long-term goal is to limit the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Climate Week has UN officials, AU representatives, and government officials from the African continent attending. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, in opening the Africa Climate Week, says the country is looking towards investing in renewable energy aimed at combating the effects of climate change.
We're also determined to make natural gas, which we have in abundance, available for the generation of electricity. in this year's budget, I tasked the Ministries of Energy and Finance to come up with special incentives for the introduction of electric cars in Ghana. I recently announced a major policy boost for distributed renewable energy. Soon, the seat of our nation's presidency, Jubilee House, will be powered by solar energy.
Meanwhile, as agriculture on the African continent suffers from the effects of climate change through long periods of drought, experts say new solutions should focus on adapting to climate change rather than mitigating it.
Agriculture practices that are really adapted to climate change, that would include let's say the need to make sure that we are sustainably managing the natural resources, the soil, the water, and even the seed, using the right seeds.
If you do irrigation, farmers can do agriculture year-round, whether it rains or it doesn't rain. So that issue is key and it needs to be done. So we're hoping that the government of Ghana will do this and other governments as well.
The World Bank has launched an action plan on climate change adaptation and resilience, under which it will increase direct adaptation climate finance to $50 billion between 2021 and 2025. Participants at the Africa Climate Week, however, say more investment is needed to fund smart solutions to combat climate change. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
All right, a group of Egyptians have laid their hands on a very profitable business that doesn't need huge initial investment. The business is, however, quite dangerous. They raise scorpions and sell their venom to local pharmaceutical companies. Here is Adel Al-Muruki with more on that story.
Far from the Egyptian capital, a group of young Egyptians have invested in a rare business. With very little investment, they've established a project that produces a highly needed component for pharmaceutical companies: venom. This is a scorpion's farm.
It's a rare business in Egypt, so right now it's quite profitable. But it's not an easy one. You must first learn the behavior of the creatures, how dangerous they are, and understand, beside venom, how a scorpion can be used. At first, we were tensed. We only handled scorpions with equipment. Step by step, we understood the movement of the scorpions. Then we started holding them with our bare hands.
This project can start with as little as $2,000 of initial investment and just a 16 square meters room. Every 1,000 of these frightening creatures produce a bit over 1 gram of dried venom, sold domestically for about $800. It's used by pharmaceuticals to create antibiotics, vaccinations, and other medicines. Ashri and his partners began in 2015. Today, they have over a dozen farms with a total of 50,000 scorpions, in addition to other poisonous snakes.
Their venom is made of protein. It mainly feeds on insects. So we must give it high-protein insects like locusts, cockroaches, and specific worms, like the mealworm.
Aiming for self-sustainability and avoiding the high fluctuations of worms prices, the team decided to create their own worms and insects farm to feed their scorpions. Most of these creatures are from Aswan. They are known as Luria scorpions, or the death stalkers. Before going into that business, like most people, Ashri thought their sting was deadly.
We realized that adult scorpion bites are not that fatal. They actually have beneficial factors. They strengthen the immune system and increases red and white blood cells.
In the wild, they can live for 20 years. Here, however, they are only useful for just 6 months. After that, their venom is not as pure as required for business. Because this species is common in Egypt, the scorpions are dried and then crushed. Their powder is then used to make cosmetics. Until their time comes, they will remain warm in these boxes, fueling this unique business to later heal thousands of people. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, in Tunisia, the capital city of Tunis has hosted festivities for National Handicrafts Day. Citizens descended on the old town dressed in traditional clothing. They chanted and danced in celebration of Tunisia's cultural heritage. Now, the event was boosted and has boosted handicraft sales and attracted thousands of tourists. Let's take a look at that.
Tunisian women, men and children have worn traditional attire from 24 regions across the country to celebrate the National Handicrafts Day, which is also known as Kharja.
This is an exceptional day. Tunisians from all walks of life have gathered in downtown Tunis wearing their best traditional attire. Tunisians live in a modern society, but they are still attached to their traditions.
Sefseri is a traditional veil covering the whole body. It is worn by women in Tunisia. Some young designers have modernized the clothing using new materials and colors. Designers are also training a group of handicapped youths and teaching them the art of Sefseri making.
Young women no longer wear beautiful pieces of clothing such as this. Now we are transmitting the know-how and the skills to hundreds of young men and women who will perpetuate the tradition and earn a decent living.
And in news just in, let's now turn our attention to Chinese President Xi Jinping's trip to Italy, Monaco, and France in his first overseas trip of the year. President Xi has just arrived in Rome. We are now bringing you live pictures of the Chinese president's arrival in Italy. During his time in Italy, President Xi will meet with Italian President Sergio Mattarella and Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and other political leaders. The two countries are also set to sign agreements to boost cultural and trade ties. Discussions on how to generate tangible benefits for the people of both countries within the Belt and Road Framework will also be held. Chinese President Xi Jinping's two-day official visit in Rome and Sicily may be a turning point not only for Italy, but for the region as a whole in the years to come, as Rome is set to sign a memorandum of understanding to endorse China's Belt and Road Initiative. Potential Chinese investments in Italian ports have also created a stir in Italy, with the Chinese president set to visit Sicily on Saturday, signaling an agreement regarding ports. And that, of course, may be on the table. Prior to his arrival, though, an article signed by Xi was published in the Italian daily newspaper. Xi stressed the visit would mark the beginning of a new era of Chinese-Italian ties with a strengthened, comprehensive, strategic partnership. Once again, President Xi Jinping has arrived in Italy, part of his three-country tour. He'll be going to Monaco and France as well. Chinese-European ties are in the spotlight as President Xi travels to Rome to start his first overseas trip of the year. Once again, during his time in Italy, President Xi will meet with the Italian President Sergio Mattarella and Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and other political leaders. The two countries are also set to sign agreements to boost cultural and trade ties. Discussions on how to generate tangible benefits for the people of both countries within the Belt and Road Framework will also be held. Once again, we're bringing you live pictures. President Xi Jinping arrives in Italy, part of his three-country tour. He will also be heading to Monaco and France. The two countries, Italy and China, are set to sign agreements to boost cultural and trade ties. Discussions on how to generate tangible benefits for the people of both countries within the Belt and Road Framework will also be held. He is set to meet with Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and Italian President Sergio Mattarella. There has been speculation that he possibly could meet with the Pope Francis, but that has not been confirmed. But it is said that it is possible. China-European ties are in the spotlight as President Xi travels to Rome. He has arrived in Italy. Once again, the two countries are also set to sign agreements to boost cultural and trade ties. Discussions on how to generate tangible benefits for the people of both countries within the Belt and Road framework will also be held. All right, let's now go to my colleague Rama Nyang with our business news and headlines. Rama.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe will raise the salaries of its lowest paid civil servants by nearly 30%. And South Africa's Group 5 has filed for business rescue. We'll look at its rise and fall. Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. Welcome back to the program. Let's start in Zimbabwe, where public servants have accepted a 29% offer to raise the minimum wage that they all pretty much enjoy. Effectively, this will take effect from the 1st of April. So under the terms of this agreement between the government on one hand and civil servants on the other, the lowest paid civil servants will now earn a monthly gross salary of $570 from the prior figure of about $441. An agreement signed by the government and the Public Workers Union said a cost of living adjustment of about $400 in total will be affected across the board. You'll also be able to import vehicles without paying import duty, and the government will provide buses to transport civil servants to and from their workplaces as well. Civil servants in the country twice rejected a much lower government wage offer in January, but they've been divided about whether or not to actually go on strike. Teachers, however, did briefly walk out of their jobs. Over in West Africa, Nigeria's budget minister says that the country may seek to double its value-added tax rate in order to actually fund a minimum wage hike that was approved by legislators not too long ago. The minimum wage now, of course, is $83 a month. The budget ministry told lawmakers that Nigerians should brace themselves for more taxes to fund the pay hike their representatives agreed to. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with the details.
The approval of the Senate was long seen as a mere formality after both the executive and the House of Representatives had given the approval of the new minimum wage of 30,000 naira or $83 if you're using the unofficial parallel market exchange rate. Both the Senate and House of Representatives are now expected to harmonize or consolidate their positions and present the new minimum wage bill to President Muhammadu Buhari for his assent. This is, of course, expected to be done with dispatch since all sides are on the same page on the issue. So it might just be a matter of days before Nigeria enacts a new minimum wage law. But of course, the other knotty issue remains how the government plans to implement this. Some state governments have said they would find it difficult to pay 30,000 naira and had actually pushed for a lower amount. The Senate now wants the president to review the country's revenue sharing formula so that more monies can go to the states to enable them pay the new minimum wage. The executive itself is also considering hiking VAT from the current 5% to raise the funds to pay the new wage. Both options, of course, would still require parliamentary approval. So we'll wait and see how the funding issue would be sorted out. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Still in the country, Nigeria plans to cut its stake in joint oil production ventures with multinational oil companies to 40% in the course of 2019. The budget minister, Udo Udoma, says that this plan aims to raise much-needed revenue for the state's budget. Oil majors like Royal Dutch Shell, Chevron and ExxonMobil, they all operate in Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, through joint ventures with the state-owned oil firm NNPC. Now, NNPC owns 55% of its joint ventures with Royal Dutch Shell, 60% in the JVs with the other companies. The government has considered reducing its majority stakes in these JVs for more than a decade, but it was under very little pressure because high oil prices at that time boosted state coffers. In South Africa, the construction giant Group 5 has filed for business rescue after struggling with poor cash flow. The company, of course, has been in business for 45 years. It's established quite a track record in Africa and around the world. Several companies in the sector are also battling against the exact same fate. Here's CGTN's Richard Nta now with the rise and fall of Group 5.
The construction business is about long-term projects that require massive capital injections. The last construction boom was in 2010. South Africa spent billions on new stadiums and upgrading infrastructure. But since then, infrastructure spend has been declining steadily.
There's been a number of external factors or macro factors that have affected the construction industry, which have then, sort of carried through year on year. Then I think also if you look at some of the micro issues that may have affected certain construction companies, if you look at the recent fall of Group 5, they've been struggling for a very long time with a project that was actually in Ghana, which was the gas oil project, which had its own overruns and it had its own capital issues.
Slow economic growth, an underperforming currency, corruption and high levels of national debt are some of the reasons behind the decline. Investor confidence is at an all-time low. The fear now is about losing strong South African construction companies that used to be world leaders.
We've seen other huge and reputable construction companies like Avenge and Basil Reed also virtually coming to a halt. Clearly, the negative aspects of this are that should the South African economy at any stage show signs of recovering and the inclination to increase investment is forthcoming, the danger is that there won't be sufficient skills and manpower available to ensure that the benefits of that upswing materialize.
Group 5 shares were suspended on the JSE last week after 40 years of trade on the bourse. It's the fifth construction company to go into business rescue. Group 5 still needs $257 million to keep it going until December. In February, government announced $7 billion towards infrastructure development over the next 10 years.
I think that the proof is in the implementation of this. So the budget allocation for infrastructure is there. I think that at the end of the day, it's how effective that money is being used, in what projects they're being used, and how that actually is coming to fruition.
In 2018, President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized infrastructure investment as critical for economic growth and job creation. But the sector's contribution to GDP is declining, and there's been close to 200,000 job losses in the last 3 years. Richard Nta, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, a story for this segment, this one from South Africa. Climate change is starting to adversely affect the African penguin. Colonies around the coastline, especially in the Cape area, are already showing massive signs of strain. These birds are facing a whole range of issues, all of them significant, including a food shortage, which has been attributed to a rise in sea temperatures. CGTN's Travis Andrews with this report.
For many South Africans, the effects of climate change are beginning to reveal themselves. But of course, a massive water crisis and extreme temperatures have led to runaway fires. But for the African penguin, climate change is already a life and death situation, and colonies are now left with around 40,000 breeding pairs, which is a significant drop from the millions of around 100 years ago. Seabird experts believe the long-term prognosis does not look good, and threats of extinction must be taken seriously, as the species decline shows no signs of abating.
In South Africa, we're expected to see potentially higher seas and rising water levels. That has the potential to wash away nests, wash away breeding areas. So that's obviously an area there. What we're starting to see and what researchers are currently working on is that the climate change also has the potential to influence where the fish stocks are moving, so where the penguins are actually getting their food. So if the climate change is moving the fish away from the colonies, it means that the birds have to, the penguins have to travel so much further to go and catch the fish to take back to their chicks.
The West Western Cape is the natural habitat for most African penguin colonies, as the cold waters are rich in nutrients, which are good for fish stocks. But commercial overfishing and rising sea temperatures due to global warming have become factors affecting the penguin stocks, and now many believe urgent action is needed. South Africa has recently declared 20 new marine protected areas, which are more than 2.5 times the size of the Kruger National Park. And in the Kruger National Park, animals are afforded some form of protection against human interaction. Some penguin experts believe this could also assist penguins in surviving possible extinction.
These birds do feed on sardines, and that is what humans feed on as well. When overfishing occurs and overfishing happens in particular areas around penguin environments, that causes a lot of stress on animals, especially penguins that have to swim further out to the wild, going into predation areas, and they get eaten by other predators. But if there is a protected area where people are not allowed to go and fish for, and people are not allowed to go in those particular areas where penguins are allowed to go and feed, that could potentially help increase so many more environments for these birds to actually lay eggs and just feed themselves in that type of environment.
So a lot of work is being done to save this highly endangered species, including in vitro fertilization programs and rehabilitation of sick and injured animals. But climate change is a global issue which requires a global response. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you, Rama. You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We have your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a look at the headline. It's crunch time for teams in the last round of the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.